Welcome back. Last week we started establishing the different layers of the stack that will be the final handle, and we were using the mill for that, which can be a little bit procedural. Well, this week we're going to change it up a little bit because we're going to start freehand shaping all of those pieces, which I think is a little bit more entertaining. So let's get into it.
First up is the cross guard, which we want to look like a paper scroll with the curls of paper rolling forward towards the blade. And I want those curls of paper to start narrow, and as it works towards the center of the roll, I want the paper to get a little wider. If you've ever looked at the head of a violin, then you're probably familiar with the shape I'm describing. I've scribed the inner edge of that shape and the outer edge of that shape in the red dicum, and now I'm mounting it in the ball vise. You can let me know if you believe that I filed this whole thing by hand, or if I don't know, snuck over to the belt sander in between edits. We use the hand file to establish that wide edge of the scroll. Now we're going to have to establish the narrow edge of that scroll. To do that, we're going to use a rotary tool with a burr in it. This rotary tool is a Fordham, which, unlike the Dremel, has an external motor, so it has a much better duty cycle. You can really go to town with it. The taper from the narrow dimension of the scroll to the wide dimension of the scroll follows a spiral, so I'm scribing that out on the edge of the guard. This will all make sense in about 20 seconds when you see it. Bear with me. The scroll is supposed to give the illusion of being a wound up thin sheet of paper. This flat spiral doesn't look like that, no. So here I'm using the burr to remove some of the material behind what would be the surface of the paper, and that will catch shadows and help sell the illusion. All this freehand grinding is kind of rounding off what's meant to be the edge of the paper. So here I'm using a hand file to reflatten the edge of the paper. And here you can see how that looks before and after. Here I'm narrowing the center of the roll, and that's to give it that look like a cartoonish newspaper where it's always rolled a little tighter in the middle than it is on the ends. We are going to rivet down a peen block, but for a little extra hold and to allow us to tighten everything down, I'm going to put threads in the peen block so that it behaves like a nut. The first step of that is to ground the tang round, and that'll allow it to receive threads. We want this to be strong, so the diameter of the post that we've just ground is the same as the old thickness of the tang. And the largest die that'll fit that diameter is an M4.5 die, so we're going with that. While we go, we'll check it regularly with a square to make sure everything's staying straight. You keep everything oiled well, and you turn the cutter 1 or 2 turns forward and half a turn backwards. That'll allow the metal that you're cutting off to break and fall away so that it doesn't gum everything up. And before you know it, you've got threads. We just made the screw, so now we need to make the nut, which in this case is the peen block. This is basically the reverse operation of what we just did. We're going to first drill a hole through the block, and once that's done, we will cut threads in it with a tap. Cutting threads of this size is usually done by hand, but you'll see that I'm loading the thread tap into the mill. I will not be turning the mill on. I'll be cranking this by hand. I'm only using the mill to make sure the tap stays perfectly vertical while we cut our threads. After a little bit of cleanup on the peen block and the tang, we'll be ready to glue the handle up. This is a Loctite 2-part epoxy, and it does cure white, so I'm going to be adding a little bit of activated charcoal as a pigment to darken it up in case any of the epoxy is visible on the final handle. Once it's thoroughly mixed, just start applying it generously to the tang and sliding on each part of the handle, preferably in order. As I mentioned before, most of these components are going to be shaped all at once after the glue is set, so until that happens, this is going to look very rough. After the pommel is on, we tighten the peen block down with a wrench, do a little cleanup, and I like to let it sit for a full 24 hours before I continue.
That looks like hell, but that's where this video is going to end, unfortunately. I hope you'll tune in next week because I don't want to leave a bad taste in your mouth. It'll start to actually look like a handle then. So if you want to check that out, hit the subscription button and the notification bell, and I'll see you then.